All right, so in today's lesson, we are going to focus on describe image. Now, this is a very significant part of your PTE test, so pay special attention on how we can excel at describe image. So I'll get straight into it and I'll start sharing my screen. Our agenda for today is we're going to be talking about describe image. I'll start with an introduction to describe image. Then we'll talk about strategies. Then we will look at planning strategies. So obviously, you will have to speak for 40 seconds, but you'll have 25 seconds to plan your speech. So we will look at what are the things that we should be focusing on. Then we will look at planning and fluency strategies. Then we will look at stress and intonation. So obviously you'll need stress and intonation because it's a speaking test. And then we will do some practice, and then we'll talk about some checklist items that we should focus on in terms of what are the things we should look for in a good response. We'll touch on scoring as well in terms of how the test is scored, and we will do a practice and review of sample answers. All right, so first things first, let's look at what describe image is. It's describe image is you will be presented with an image, and you will have 25 seconds to study the image and prepare your response. You will have 40 seconds to really record your response. You should focus on what? You should focus on main information, and you should organize your points in terms of introduction. You should introduce the image, and you should have a main body of your response, and you should have a conclusion. In terms of strategies, before you speak or record your response, you should study the image carefully. You have 25 seconds. 25 seconds doesn't seem that long, but in that 25 seconds, you need to use that 25 seconds very, very prudently. So first, familiarize yourself with the general topic and the type of information that is presented to you in the form of an image, okay? Check the title, check the axes, if it's a graph or a chart, look at the axes, y-axis and x-axis, the heading and subheadings, look at all the headings if it's a table, and look at the labels. If it's a map or a picture, look at the labels. Whatever information you can find on the image, look at each one of them. Then units of measurements. Sometimes you will be presented units of measurements, US dollars, kilograms, etc. Pay attention to those, and the reference points, pay attention to those as well, years, entities, etc. In terms of graphs, charts, and tables, often they highlight some sort of trend. So you want to make sure that you can look at some trends. Maps and pictures usually highlight important features. So you want to look at what are the features that the maps and pictures are highlighting. Speak when you hear the tone beep and you start speaking. After 25 seconds, you will hear tone, and then you should start recording. You should see the status bar when it says recording as well. Now, while you're speaking, you should speak clearly and naturally and without any hesitation. Describe general topic and summarize the most significant or important points. Do not repeat yourself. Now, what happens, this is a speaking test, and we've talked about in read aloud, and we've talked about this in repeat sentence. You don't want to repeat yourself. If you repeat yourself, this is marked by the computer, and computer thinks that you're saying irrelevant things because you're repeating yourself. And it doesn't recognize that you're just repeating yourself. You might lose your points there. Do not go back to correct yourself. Again, do not have any false starts. So if you started and you made a mistake, carry on and correct. Start saying correct information, but do not go back and repeat yourself to correct yourself. So that's my advice there. So let's do activity number 1. Here, we're going to focus on planning strategies. So I want you to look at this paragraph, and I want you to look at all the information that you can see in this image. So first up, we've got a title on this graph, right? So this is, first of all, what kind of image this is a graph, obviously, and you've got a title of the graph is Spanish speaking countries by population. What do we have on the x-axis? On the y-axis, we have countries: Chile, Peru, Venezuela, United States, Spain, Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. And on the x-axis, we've got population in millions, okay? So whenever we're talking about, we want to link them both, right? So these are some of the things that you want to think of. What is your speaking purpose for this task? You are supposed to describe a graph and recount its statistical information, right? So you want to talk about the statistics here, because this is what the graph is presenting to you. What is the general topic conveyed by this image? The population of Spanish-speaking people in various countries. Okay, that's what the general topic is. And it does say that on the top, that this is the topic of the image, the Spanish population of Spanish-speaking people in various countries. What information is given on the X and Y axis? X axis, you've got countries, and Y axis, you've got population. Sorry, I said that other way around, but Y axis, you've got population, and X axis, you've got countries. What unit of measurement is used? You've got millions. So unit of measurement, you want to see, if it's US dollars, kilograms, millions, whatever. Next up, we've got what significant information is conveyed by the image. What is significant here? Most Spanish-speaking countries are in Latin America. You can come to that conclusion after looking at the image. And Mexico has the greatest number. So you want to look at the high point here. You've got a biggest population of Spanish speakers in Mexico. Okay, so that you can't miss. And another point here is that's most important is that most countries are in Latin America. You can make that point here as well. Are there any remarkable facts given in the graph's information? You want to think about remarkable facts as well. The US has more Spanish-speaking people than several Latin American countries. So you can come up with that. If you look at US got more Spanish speakers in countries like, for example, Venezuela, Peru, and Chile, because United States is one of the countries where English is the main language there. It's the first language. But it has so many Spanish speakers that it is higher compared to the some other countries that are actually the Spanish speaking. The first language is Spanish there. Now, and several Latin American countries have more Spanish speakers than Spain. So that's a remarkable fact as well that you can mention, but you can come up with your own remarkable points that you see. These are some of the examples that I want to share with you. All right, now how would you organize and sequence? Now, when you're planning your strategy, when you're planning your response, how would you organize and sequence your description? Organization and sequencing is very important. Description of graphical images usually begin with a sentence that states the main point. So you want to talk about the main point. This graph illustrates that, whatever the topic is, then often paraphrase from the title. So you look at the title and you can paraphrase it. You don't have to, I mean, if you can't paraphrase, you can still read what's written to you, but the advanced test taker will obviously paraphrase that, followed by facts from the Y or X axis, supported by statistics. All right. So you talk about, how many millions in each country and stuff like that. You would want to include the statistics here. If test takers can see a trend or an exception, if you can see any trend or any outlier, you can mention that. They should comment on it and support what they say with some data. If test takers are describing data that does not have any obvious trend, they should describe a graph from left to right. So sometimes you don't see any trend. You can always talk about, the data from left to right, and you can include all the important points in the graph. And start with the largest piece of pie. If it's a pie chart, you can always start with the largest to smallest piece of pie. Now, what verb tense should we use? This is very important to understand as well. Now, what verb tense would you use to describe the projected graph and why? The simple present is my recommendation. You should use simple present because the graph has no fixed time periods. If the graph, if fixed time periods were used, if it's been given like in 1980, something happened, and now in 2023, this is happening, in 2000 something happened. If something is in the past and you're explaining about the past, then you can use past simple, right? But otherwise, in majority of the cases, you will be using simple present. Okay, what verbs could be used to describe the population in different countries? Now, you may want to note them down. These are: this, has, accounts for, possesses, claims. What are the verbs that can be used to describe populations in different countries? Spain has, Spain accounts for, or US accounts for, Mexico possesses or claims. All right, these are some of the words that you can use. Now, what are some words that might be used to refer to the numbers of Spanish speakers in different countries? More than, less than, approximately, right? So what you're doing is that what are some words that might be used to refer to the number of Spanish speakers in different countries? If you're comparing, you could say US has more than Spain, or Venezuela, for example. Venezuela has less Spanish speakers than US, or approximately Mexico has approximately 130 million Spanish speakers, which is the highest, or just about, or precisely. These are some of the words that you can use when you talk about all of the details in the graph. You may want to note them down, and it's okay to note them down and start using them in when you do your practice. All right, so now we're going to do a guided practice. I'm going to give you a template and I want you to use this template. It's quite easy. We start with the title of the graph, and we start using the significant information. But I want you to pause the video here, and I want you to fill in the gaps here in this template, and I will show you the response afterwards, and we can go from there. All right, I hope you had a chance to do this exercise on your own and fill in the gaps. So obviously, what do we see here? The first thing we see, the first thing that our mind should be looking at in any graph is the title or the topic. So the topic here is Spanish-speaking countries by population. So the first sentence should be, you should start by saying this graph represents, or this graph illustrates, or this graph So let me show the response, the sample response here, the graph, and I will give you a few verbs as well so that you can use them instead of just saying shows, because you're going to get more than one describe image. You can use all of these words as well. This graph shows, or illustrates, or presents, or depicts, or even represents. You can use the number in millions. So we're taking that information from the graph, in millions of the people who speak Spanish around the world. That's the topic, in various countries in the Americas and Europe, right? Mexico has, if we're starting with the largest point here, Mexico has over double the number of Spanish speakers over any other country, including Spain. So you made a point that Mexico has the largest population of Spanish speakers. Colombia and Argentina each have, or these are some verbs that you can use as well, have, claim, possesses, account for over 30 million Spanish speakers. The United States, that's a remarkable fact. The United States has more Spanish speakers, over 20 million or more than 20 million, than Venezuela, Peru, and Chile. Now let's do another graph, and you've got two graphs here. One is a pie chart and the other one is a bar chart. I want you to just think about this template and use it and apply this template on these two graphs. Please pause the video here, 5 minutes for each of these graphs, and then we are going to review the answers. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at these two images, and you had a chance to go through these two images and really look at that template and write down important information, starting with the first title of the chart. So in your first image, obviously it says image number 1 is New Zealand exports. That's your title to all of these countries. And then you've got the second image. The title of the graph will be daily processor chip output. Sometimes the title could be on top, as you can see in the second image, daily processor chip output. Sometimes it has a title, sometimes it doesn't have a title, but it shows you in at the bottom what the image is about. So it gives you some information that you can use in your speech. All right, so I'm going to share with you the responses, the possible responses, and obviously your response can be different depending on what significant facts that you got from the image. But let's look at the image number 1, New Zealand exports. So first things first, we are going to talk about the topic. So the topic is, this pie chart illustrates the countries which are New Zealand's main export markets. These include Australia, the USA, Japan, China, and the UK. Exports to Australia account for 21% of all exports from New Zealand. The USA accounts for 14%, Japan 11%, China 6%, followed by the UK at 5%. The information indicates that another 43% of total exports go to a range of other destinations. That's one of the ways you can describe this image. Let's look at image number 2, daily processor chip output. The graph shows the output of processor chips over a week with figures provided for each day, right? So it starts with the title or the topic of the image, the greatest number of chips. So there is a highest point. So we start with the highest point and say the greatest number of chips was produced on Friday with about 16,000 chips produced. A similar number was produced on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and with just under 14,000 chips each day. And if you can't read the numbers accurately, don't worry too much about the numbers. You can say approximately 14,000 or around 40,000 or just about 14,000, right? About 10,000 chips were produced on Monday, while 7,000 were produced on Saturday. There were no chips produced on Sunday. So that's how you can, write down some of the points that you want to speak about and describe and use them in your response. Okay, now we're going to talk about describing photographs. So sometimes you can get graphs, but you can also get photographs. Now, this is one of the photographs, and it only says to you new and old, and it gives you a bunch of buildings, right? You've got one building, skyscraper, and you've got a smaller building in front. So pause the video here, maybe take about 5 minutes to write down the details of this image and graph and what you see here. And then I'm going to show you a response. All right, I hope you had a chance to do the image on your own and write down the response, but I'm going to share one response with you and what are the things that we should be looking at. So what is your speaking purpose for this task? Now, this is an image that contrasts the old building and the new building. What is the general topic conveyed by this image? It's contrasting the old and the new, right? How would you organize and sequence your description of this image? Description of images that emphasize contrast usually begin with a sentence that states the main topic of contrast and then give examples of differences. What verb tense would you use to describe the contrast and why? The present simple tense, because the picture has no fixed time periods and both the old and the new building exist in the present. If two different time periods were presented or contrasted, then you can use then and now. For then, you will use the past simple tense, and for now, you will use the present simple tense, right? What verbs could be used to describe the features of the different buildings? You can use the tall building has, or shows, or includes, or is, all of these verbs that you can use to describe the buildings. What are some contrasting adjectives that might be used to refer to the buildings? Old and new, high and low, smooth and rough, modern and classic. Okay, these are some of the adjectives that you can use when you're contrasting these two buildings. So let's look at the possible response for this image. The image shows a skyscraper and a relatively older building in the foreground. Some of the older surrounding buildings are reflected in the facade of the skyscraper. The skyscraper is probably 50 stories high, while the older building would be around 10 stories. The skyscraper is made of glass. The older building is much more ornate and is probably made of brick, wood, and tiles. There is quite a juxtaposition between the two styles of building. Right, so juxtaposition means contrast. These are two different styles of buildings, and you can talk about style. You can talk about obviously we're talking about their construction. So one is made of glass, one is made of brick, wood, tiles. That's what you think. You can also talk about your opinion, but you're using present simple form to talk about all of these things. Okay, there's not much to comment on here, but if you can really think about what are the things that can be true, then you can construct your response like that. Okay, now we're going to talk about stress and intonation. And in terms of stress and intonation in English, a lot of meaning is expressed, as you know, and we talked about this in read aloud and repeat sentence and answer short question, and we learn stress and intonation. We're going to revisit here the stress and intonation. In English, a lot of meaning is expressed by stressing certain words, that is saying them with more emphasis and loudly, like I'm doing right now. Okay, these are generally keywords and new information. Keywords and new information you want to say a little bit louder and with a little bit emphasis. Now, in terms of word stress, is important as stressing an incorrect syllable in a word can create confusion, right? Saying the word, for example, syllable with a second syllable stress rather than the first create confusion for the listener. So if instead of syllable, I said syllable, then I'm like, what, is there a different word? Or, I mean, what does that mean? So it creates confusion, and that's why you want to learn the syllable. And the best thing I said to you, if you wanted to learn the syllable stress is, if you think that your pronunciation, and if you don't know the pronunciation of any word, go on Google and just write how to pronounce that word, and it gives you the sentence, so the word stress, sorry, and you can always learn which syllable is stress, and you can say that out loud 10 to 20 times to train your tongue to be able to say that word when the next time when you say that word, it will come out correctly. Okay. Now, in terms of intonation, that is whether the speaker's voice rises and falls. That also gives a lot of meaning and also tells the listener the speaker's intention. For example, rising intonation generally accompanies a question, and falling intonation accompanies a statement. In addition, rising or falling intonation for a single word can indicate the speaker's attitude. For example, if I said really, indicates surprise, and so obviously really, this is a higher intonation tone. It indicates surprise or disbelief. Really, wow. So I mean, I'm surprised, or I don't really believe that that's the meaning, right? You can catch the meaning the way I say it. Or if I say really, if I say it in a monotone, really, without any intonation, without any rising intonation, it indicates impatience or annoyance. Maybe I'm annoyed, I'm impatient, I'm saying really, really. So really and really. Yeah. So the meaning changes based on your intonation, and it's very important, especially if you want to sound polite. I urge my students to always use a rising and falling intonation to sound polite. Don't sound monotone, because monotone is a rude tone, and that's why you want to pay special attention when you're describing an image and you want to convey a certain meaning. You should use rising and falling intonation. Okay, so I'm going to give you word stress, sentence stress, intonation, and I want you to do a little bit of exercise with me. I'm going to show you the rules, but don't don't worry too much about these rules, because the way to learn these is just to learn by intuition, learn them and then practice them. And I mean, don't get bogged down by the rules, because sometimes, rules, you can't really, there's so many rules and there are so many exceptions, you wouldn't be able to remember all the rules. So don't worry too much, but as a teacher, my job is to teach you the rules and show you the rules. The rules do exist, but a caveat here is that not always the rules will work. There are a lot of exceptions. Okay, so we're going to look at word stress first of all. We've got 2-syllable nouns, we've got 2-syllable verbs, and we've got 3-syllable verbs, and we've got 3-syllable nouns and adjectives. I want you to underline the syllable that is stressed. I'm not going to say it right now, and we'll review the answers later. Same for sentence stress. And sentence stress, we already know that, there are certain words that you stress, and depending on the meaning, there is one possible answer. If I show you the answer, that's not the only answer. The words that you pronounce could be different to the response that I'm going to share with you, but you should know that the important words are stressed here. The nouns, the verbs, the adjectives are stressed, not the prepositions, okay? So if you're stressing the prepositions, that might not make sense. All right, intonation also, I want you to draw the upward arrow when you think the intonation rises, and I want you to draw a downward intonation. And please pause the video here when you're doing this activity and the previous activity. Please pause the video, go back and do this activity properly, and put a upward arrow if you think the intonation should rise at that certain point, and if it should fall. And I've already taught you all the information there. If the intonation falls, please draw a downward arrow, and please pause the video and do the exercise, and then we're going to review this together. All right, so I hope you had a chance to look at the word stress. First, we're going to look at this word stress one, and I'm going to, again, with the caveat that rules not always apply. There are a lot of exceptions, but I'm going to, as a teacher, my job is to give you the rules, and I'm going to give you the rules, but always learn a word stress by, checking your pronunciation. And if you're not sure about your pronunciation, go on Google and find the word that you want to learn and do that exercise 10 to 20 times, repeat 10 to 20 times, and practice producing the right syllable stress. Okay, so here, 2-syllable nouns, we've got image, output, and speakers. So first syllable is stressed when you have 2-syllable nouns. When you have 2-syllable verbs, then the second syllable is stressed. Describes, accounts for, presents. All right. Third, 3-syllable verbs, the first syllable is stressed. Illustrates, indicates, fluctuates. 3-syllable nouns and adjectives, the first syllable is stressed. Fluency, various, syllable. And here are some of the more tendency for the words. 2-syllable nouns, stress is on the first syllable, image and speaker. 2-syllable verbs, stress on the second syllable, present and describe. And 3-syllable verbs, stress on the first syllable, illustrate. And 3-syllable nouns and adjectives, stress is on the first syllable, syllable. Okay. Now, some other tendencies that you should try to notice: 2-syllable adjectives, the stress is on the first syllable, lower and random. Words ending with ION, the stress is on the next to last syllable. Television, so just before ION, television, construction, right? Words ending with CY, FY, GY, PHY, and TY and AL stresses on the syllable third from the end. Democracy, photography, nationality, logical, right? Compound noun stresses on the first syllable, class, room, compound noun, right? Compound verbs stresses on the second syllable, overrule, as underestimate, okay? So these are some of the rules. Again, you will have to learn word by word. You wouldn't remember these rules, and again, the rules do not apply. So just I'm telling you the rules. You can have them in their mind. If they work, that's completely fine. If it works for someone, it's completely great. But I know that it doesn't apply to all of the students, because I deal with a lot of students, and I know that most of the students are like, I mean, yes, thank you very much for the rules, but I mean, I don't really know how to apply them. So try to just based on your intuition. If you got any of these pronunciation wrong, please go and do the exercise that I told you. Find the word on Google. Okay, we're gonna look at sentence stress now. Now this is one possible answer, suggested answer, and I'm gonna show you the incorrect answer as well. But incorrect one is just gonna focus on, you know, prepositions and other things, and we don't want to be emphasizing those words. But if you got some words that are that you think are important and you should be stressing those words, that's completely fine as well. This is one suggested answer. So let's look at this one. So I'm going to read it out, and I'm going to read it with the stress pattern that has been suggested here, and you can hear me out. The pie chart illustrates the countries which are New Zealand's main export markets. These include Australia, the USA, Japan, China, and the UK. Exports to Australia accounts for 21% of all exports from New Zealand. The USA accounts for 14%, Japan 11%, China 6%, followed by the UK at 5%. The information indicates that another 43% of total exports go to a range of other destinations. Okay, so this is one pattern where you can emphasize, and it is emphasizing the important bits that it thinks it's important. Now, the incorrect sentence stress will be, and you can see the articles are stress and the prepositions are stress. You don't want to do that, right? The pie chart illustrates the countries which are New Zealand's main export markets. These include Australia, the USA, Japan, China, and the UK. Exports to Australia accounts for 21% of all exports from New Zealand. The USA account for 14%, Japan 11%, China 6%, followed by the UK at 5%. The information indicates that another 43% of total exports to a range of other destinations. Obviously, that doesn't make sense. It's causing a lot of confusion for the listener to understand what is being said. Okay, so you don't want to do it like that. All right. Now, in terms of intonation, again, this is one possible way of doing it, but we did discuss, you know, the intonation patterns in read aloud and repeat sentence part of the test, and you can go back and listen to that lesson if you're not sure. But I'm not going to go in real detail here, but I'm going to pronounce it the way it has been suggested here. Okay. The described image item type is scored according to 3 factors: content, oral fluency, and pronunciation. The score for content is based on your ability to accurately and thoroughly describe the image. In other words, you need to describe all aspects and elements of the image. The score for oral fluency is based on your ability to speak smoothly, effortlessly, and naturally. You need to make sure that your rhythm, phrasing, and stress are smooth and accurate, and that you can keep speaking without too many pauses, repetitions, false starts, or hesitations. So in the end of the sentence, it's kind of falling. The intonation should fall. So in general, and this is in general again, there are exceptions, our voice falls towards the end of a sentence when it is a statement, command, or wah question. So I'm getting the rest, I'm getting the test, I'm doing the test today, sorry. I'm doing the test today. That's a statement. So the intonation falls at the end. Get ready. The intonation falls in the end. Get ready. Okay. Where's your book? Where's your book? Where's your book? No. Where's your book? Where's your book? Okay. False, because it's a wah question. A voice rises if listing items. Listing items. So you've got listing items, and you saw like rhythm, phrasing, and stress or pauses, repetitions. These are all listing items. So if you've got more than one options or items that you're talking about, the first items are stressed before the end, and the last item is not. I mean, it's stressed, but the intonation kind of falls. With stress and intonation, it's slightly different things. So we're talking about intonation here. And now our voices, if listing items with commas or semicolons separating them, and during a yes or no question or a request. So our voice rises, right, when we're doing all of these. I need to improve my pronunciation, word stress, and grammar. Okay, so we've got list of items, pronunciation, word stress, and grammar. It falls in the end. Are you ready? Are you ready? It's a yes or no question. And could you begin, please? It's a request. So our intonation goes up, right? Now we're gonna look at a timed practice of the item. So obviously, please look at this image. I'm gonna sharply give you 25 seconds to look at the image. And then you are going to speak in 40 seconds and try to speak and record your response. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at this response so you could see that this is an image that gives you a timetable for Monday semester 1, and it has different subjects that are running on different times. So let me share with you a sample response for this one. So obviously first we will start with the image shows a school timetable for Monday in semester 1, all right? Then we will start from top to bottom because obviously there is no trend here. So we can always talk about what's first and what's last. So lectures start at 9 a.m. and concludes at 4 p.m. It talks about conclusion. In the end, you can always change the direct. You can talk about the conclusion later on as well. That's not an issue. The first lecture is introductory statistics at 9 a.m. The next lecture is at 10 a.m. Psychology 1. Lunch is at 12 noon. There is an English literature tutorial which lasts from 1 to 3 p.m. The last lecture is Economics 1, which starts at 3 p.m. and concludes at 4 p.m. There's not much to it. If you don't have more details, don't add anything from your own head. You just look at the image and it just describe it. It's pretty straightforward and simple one. All right, again, I will give you one more. Please pause the video here. Look at this image for 25 seconds. Plan your response, and then please record your response for 40 seconds. And we will come back and review the response. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at it in 25 seconds and record your response for 40 seconds. Let me show you the sample response here. Again, this is a diagram that shows how a selection of 100 second-year students travel to university. That's 100 students. 60 students said they travel by train, and 30 stated that they travel by car, while 10 students stated that they travel by both car and train. One could conclude, and you're coming up with your conclusion, that most respondents travel by university by train, a minority travel by car, while a small number of respondents 10% travel by both train and car. So you're kind of repeating the information because you don't have more information. But you can say one can conclude, or I conclude that, or I come to a conclusion. You can always come up with a conclusion if you don't have more information to add. But you have to paraphrase, okay? So do paraphrase that. Now, I want to share a checklist with you once you have recorded this. I mean, what are the things that we should look for when we are recording? Again, you will not have a review time after recording, but what are the things that you should pay attention to? So in a good response, you should ask all of these questions. Did you use the title, keywords, and information from the image? You should be looking at the title, you should be looking at the keywords, and you should be looking at all the information in the image. Did you begin by giving a sentence that described the main topic of the image? So the first thing that you should talk about is the main topic, not the details. Did you talk about content that was directly relevant to the image? Did your description have a logical organization? So obviously you should have logical organization. If it's a trend, you should talk about the highest point and the smallest point afterwards. And if there is a contrast, you should have a contrast. If there is a logical organization to you should have an introduction where you're introducing the topic, then you're talking about the details, then you should talk about, you can give a conclusion if you have time. Did you use correct grammar and a range of vocabulary? Okay. Range of vocabulary, obviously you should know you're not always using this graph shows, this graph shows. You can also use illustrates and depicts and represents and presents, all of these words that I just showed you. You should have a range of vocabulary that you're using, and the grammar should be correct. Did you use relevant verbs and correct tense for this image? Were you able to keep going without any pauses, hesitations, false starts? False starts, don't go back and correct yourself, and you should not hesitate. If you've done a good job in your 25 seconds to plan your points that you're going to speak about, you will reduce your hesitations, okay? And pauses, you should avoid the pauses as well. Did you use correct word stress and sentence stress? All right, so the stress that you want to use, try to emphasize and use stress. I mean, some of the speakers that I've heard, and I might even share with you some of the responses that they don't use stress at all. And if they don't use any stress, you're going to score poorly. And your pronunciation, especially your pronunciation, you're not going to score very well. Did you use correct intonation? Also the intonation, as we know already that, intonation conveys a lot of meaning. So you should pay attention to the intonation as well. All right, now we're going to look at another graph here, and I just want to show you, how do we focus on the main information. So here, there is a graph. We've got a map of Africa. I mean, this is a map, not a graph. So what is the main idea here, right? And what are the details relating to the main idea? And note down one word idea or short phrases while preparing. So when you're preparing, you want to know, you can note down short things that you look at this in this graph. So first things first, this graph is about a gorilla distribution. You can see, and the graph's quite small, but you've got three types of gorilla distribution here. You've got Western lowland gorillas, you've got mountain gorillas, you've got Eastern lowland gorillas, and you can see, where they're located. So you can see the location there. So you can see Western lowland gorillas are the biggest population of gorillas in Africa, and they're mainly found in the mid of Africa. And then you can talk about mountain gorilla. Mountain gorilla is the second largest population, but a lot lower than the Western gorilla population, which is also in the middle on the right hand side. And then you can talk about the Eastern, which is the smallest gorilla population in Africa, and that is found next to the area that mountain gorillas are found. So these are some of the things that you can write down before in your 25 seconds. You can say, okay, I'm going to talk about three things here. That's what's represented to me. And I can also conclude that the biggest portion of Africa is gorilla free. Okay, so that could be my because I can see the green area on the map, there are no gorillas there. Okay, so I think these are some of the things. That's how you want to think before you you record. So if I look at organizing points, in terms of introduction, general point and idea, what are the general point and idea? We looked at a graph before talking about, and it was a pie chart, right? Our graph was a pie chart, which was New Zealand export goods. That's the general topic, right? So when I'm speaking, I will introduce the topic first. So I will say the graph describes, and that's a little bit of a pause there. A graph describes the main countries to which New Zealand export goods. Australia, and you want to avoid those fillers, but you will do that with practice. But when you're introducing your first topic, you will introduce the topic. The graph describes the main countries to which New Zealand exports goods. Australia is the largest single country. New Zealand exports 21% of its goods there, and this is followed by the USA, which receives 14% of New Zealand's goods. And the main point here is the next largest markets in order are Japan 11%, China 6%, and the UK 5%. 43% of New Zealand's exports go to the countries other than these big markets. Other details and conclusion could be New Zealand is very dependent on the Australian market as a destination for exports. Perhaps it needs to diversify and seek other markets, such as building up exports to China. Right, so you can come up with a conclusion if you have time. If you don't have time, don't worry too much about it, because conclusion needs thinking. And I mean, this is an observation, right? So it's not really the conclusion, it's the observation that, building exports to China. This is a conclusion. So if you're running out of time, you can think of other things, but this is a response that I wanted to share with you, so that you have a general idea of how we organize our points. So first we want to come up with the introduction, then we want to come up with main points, and they might not be the main points, but they are the main details. That's what I mean by that. They are the main details that you want to keep in the middle, and then you want to conclude by giving either a prediction or your observation, or you could just summarize the information as well. Now let's talk about scoring, right? And scoring is very important here to understand what are the things and how it is scored. So you've got content here. All aspects and elements of image has been addressed. So you want to include all, pretty much 80-90% of the aspects that are important. You want to include them in your response. Relationships, possible developments, and conclusions or implications, right? So you want to talk about relationships. So when you're comparing things or contrasting things, you're talking about relationship. Possible development, you can also talk about in your conclusion, in your implication. You can talk about, oh, I think that, New Zealand should have a relationship with China to improve their exports, things like that. So these are some of the developments that you're coming up with, some implications that you're coming up with. So you get points for that as well in terms of content. Oral fluency, it should be smooth, effortless, and natural rate of speech. It should be without any hesitations, without any repetitions, or a false start. So once you start, keep going. Do not go back and correct yourself. Pronunciation, I did help you with the word stress and talked about the stress, stressing the words in a sentence, and also using intonation to convey the meaning. It should be understandable by regular speakers. Stress words and phrases correctly. Note that partial credit applies. So it affects, partial credit applies means that you can get high marks and a lower mark. It's not a correct or incorrect. And then it only affects this speaking in terms of communicative skills. In enabling skills, it affects your oral fluency and pronunciation. Okay, now we're going to do practice. I want you to do pause this video, do it on your own, and then come back, and I'm going to then we're going to review B1, B2, C1 responses, and I will share with you some of the explanations for all three responses. So pause the video and we will see you soon. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at this on your own and give a response and record a response as well. Now we're going to listen to B1, B2, and C1 responses, and we will look at their explanation.
The whole area in Africa is pretty much a great. It's only a little bit is Western Lowland Gloria, and most of it is on Western Lowland Gloria, and essential bit is Mountain Gloria, and a little bit area which is purple beside it is Eastern Lowland Gloria.
All right, quite a hesitation. You can feel that there was quite a lot of hesitation, and it affects your oral fluency. That's where, you know, if you're not clear about what you're trying to say and she keep repeating her points, then you're gonna score very low marks, like B1 response. Okay, let's look at B2 response.
This is a map about Africa, and it shows the gorilla distribution in the map. And there are three groups of gorillas. One called Western Lowland Gorilla. The second is the Eastern Lowland Gorilla, and the last one is Mountain Gorilla. And the Western Lowland Gorilla is the largest group.
Right, so a lot better. He didn't repeat his responses, but there are some pronunciation errors, and I mean, he did quite a good response here. I wouldn't really say in terms of content, I think it was good. He did talk about, you know, different types of gorillas and what are the groups, but I think he scored less marks. And we will read the explanation that was given to us by Pearson soon. Let's look at C1 response.
Map is describing about gorilla distribution in Africa in three capital regions like Western Lowland Gorilla, Mountain Gorilla, and Eastern Lowland Gorilla. All three types of gorilla in a different part of Africa. The largest one that you can see from map is the Western Lowland Gorilla, and the second largest is Mountain Gorilla, and the lowest population is Eastern Lowland Gorilla.
Right, so you can see that, you know, he's using adjectives to describe the largest population, the lowest population. He's kind of organizing them as well. So in B2, what was missing is that there is no organization. So I mean, there was no clear start of the topic, and then it's not really flowing. But this time you got C1, and the pronunciation was a lot better and clear. But what he's doing is organizing his points successfully. So that's what you want to do. You want to organize your points, and it kind of helps you as well. So I know that the first thing I want to talk about is the topic, then I can look at the largest point. So obviously there is the largest population of Western Lowland Gorilla, so you can focus on that. Then you can talk about the mid one. Second largest is that, third largest is that, and you can give a conclusion as well. If I were you, I could give a conclusion as well. Most of Africa does not have gorilla population. That will be my implication from this one. All right, so here, the main points, I'm going to give you the main points as well. So there are quite a lot of points, and when you're looking at it in 25 seconds, you can come up with these points. The map shows the gorilla distribution in Africa. Gorillas are only found in very small part of Africa. That's one implication as well. There are three types of gorilla found in Africa. The territory of different species of gorilla doesn't overlap. There are more Western lowland gorillas in Africa. So you go doing a comparison, you can do a comparison as well. Than any other type. There are fewer Eastern lowland gorillas in Africa than any other kind. Okay. Sample responses, B1, what happened with that? Let's read out the feedback here. While the response describes some aspects of the map, several key details are misinterpreted and the description is disorganized. The response is hesitant, making it uneven and discontinuous. There are notably long pauses. There is a clear non-native phonological simplification as the test taker tries to deliver the word gorilla. Obviously, you must have heard the word gorilla was not pronounced properly. is Gurlali, something like that was pronounced. This, so you want to be careful with pronunciation. Definitely, you want to improve your pronunciation for this task. This response demonstrates limited control over simple grammatical structures. This response lasts for 34 seconds, so that's fine. 34 seconds is okay. And that's fine. I mean, the sweet spot, you have 40 seconds. It doesn't mean that you have to respond for all 40 seconds. After 30 seconds, you can start wrapping up and you can start concluding your response. I would say 30 to 35 seconds it's a sweet spot for when it comes to describe image. In terms of B2 response, the major aspects of the map are accurately described. The test takers produces stretches of language at a fairly even tempo. This test taker pronounces most of his words correctly. The stress is placed incorrectly on some sentences. The test taker does not conspicuously search for words and does not make errors, which cause misunderstanding. Language use is acceptable. This response lasts for 28 seconds. All right. Looking at C1, the major aspect of the map and relationships between elements are accurately discussed. The test taker expresses himself fluently and spontaneously with a smooth flow of language. His pronunciation is clear and natural with very few instances of consonant and vowel distortion. This response demonstrates good control of standard English grammar and few grammatical errors. The vocabulary used is precise and appropriate for the context. This response lasts for 35 seconds. Okay, so even though you have few errors, grammatical errors, and I felt that there were some pronunciation errors as well, it's still, you can score a very good response if you have a good structure of responding, okay, and you're using good vocabulary. All right, let's look at another one. So please pause the video here, do it, look at it for 25 seconds, respond in 40 seconds, you use a stopwatch if you can, and then come back and then we are going to review. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at this image, and obviously this is a graph, this is a line graph. On top, it does give you the topic, iTunes purchase songs. On the left, on the y-axis, we've got the songs purchased. Sorry, and the week numbers. Okay, so we've got songs purchased on the y-axis, and the x-axis we've got week numbers. So we've got week numbers from 0 to 150, and the songs purchased are in millions. So you should always read what's written there. It's millions, so about 1.1. That's about 1.1 billion because it's 1,100 million. You can also say that 990 million. Okay. Or you could say 1.1 billion. So you've got that many songs, but the highest point you've got here is 1,000. The lowest point is 1. Okay, so you got the highest point, you got the lowest point. This is about iTunes purchased song, and it's rapidly growing as you can see. From week 90 to week 190, there is a trend that is rapidly growing. Okay, so I'm going to look at B1 response.
The graph shows iTunes purchase songs statistics in week number. In the first week, the song purchase was 1 million, and it grew rapidly to 1,000 million songs to the approximately 150.
Right, so there are a lot of numbers. I really like the one where she said rapidly grows to 1 million or 100 million or 1,000 million, but she's throwing at numbers all over the place. There's no kind of structure to what she's trying to say, and that's a problem here. You want to start with with your topic, and then you want to talk about the highest point. For example, you could say on week 50, the highest sales of iTunes was observed of about 1,000 million. And the start of iTunes purchase song started from week 0, and it rapidly grew from week 90 to week 30. So week 90 to 150. But you want to be clear about what numbers you throw at, because if you're saying a wrong number, it's completely fine. There is no problem with that. But as soon as you try to correct yourself and you say 150, no, 130 and 120, and I mean, that's just, you're going to lose your points. So don't do that. And that's what you try to do. Let's look at B2.
Here we can see some statistics about some tour cases and week numbers. So it shows, it depends on the week, how many songs tour cases in millions. And it's about iTunes per song. So we could find that in the 160 week number, there's the maximum result, which is 1,000 million.
Yeah, 1,000 million. So yeah, there is no organization of the response. Again, I mean, I thought this was worse than B1 because the pronunciation is quite poor, and it was hindering the understanding, I would say. Let's look at C1 now.
The graph is just, it's showing the iTunes purchase songs, and on the one side it's week number, so how many numbers were purchased per week, and on a vertical graph it's how many percent in millions. So it shows that by the week number 150, there has been 1,000, more than 1,000 iTunes songs purchased.
1,000 million. Okay, so this one again, you can score C1, and we're going to look at this explanation here, but look at the kind of points that you can gather here. So it gives you some points. The graph shows iTunes purchase songs from week 0 to week 150. That's fine. We talked about that. The number of songs purchased has risen sharply since week 90. Okay, we talked about that as well. We noticed that trend from week 90 to week 150. There were 1,000 times more songs sold in week 140 than in week 0. You don't have to be precisely 140. You could say close to 150. There were 1,000 more songs sold, and the number of songs sold by iTunes has exploded. These are some of the words that are amazing that you can use. Exploded in in the past 150 weeks. iTunes only sold 1 million songs in its first week. You can say that as well. All right. So in B1, what was wrong? There is no discussion of the relationship between the elements of the graph. Only the content of the graph is described, and the description is disorganized. So we talked about having that disorganized response, and there is no relationship talking about relationships. So in week 150, what happened in week 50? That's the relationship. You want to talk about that. You get marks for that in terms of content. The rate of response is uneven. Fluency is negatively affected by several hesitations and at least 2 repetitions. Several words are unclear because of incorrect pronunciation of some vowels and consonants. The response demonstrates limited control over grammatical structures. There is frequent pausing for lexical planning, and the overall response is labored. The response lasts for 39 seconds. In terms of B2, while the response describes basic elements of graph, it is disorganized. Again, we talked about this was not very well organized, and there is little discussion of the relationship between elements. Again, it's missing the relationship. The speech is somewhat uneven, but the rate is acceptable, and there are several long utterances. Several words are unclear because of incorrect pronunciation of some vowels and consonants. Ideas are expressed through linked discourse. Language use is acceptable, although several grammar and vocabulary errors are present. This response lasts for 30 seconds. So that's fine. 30 seconds is not as bad. So it's kind of a sweet spot, 30 to 35 seconds. 35 seconds is probably the best, but after 30 seconds, you should start wrapping your response, and you can think of conclusion, or you could think of other. You don't want to run into a situation where you haven't talked about your rhythmic conclusion and your rhythmic details, and you run out of time at 40 seconds. So that's the reason why I suggest that you try to wrap it up after 30 seconds. Okay, C1, the major aspects of the graphs are accurately described. The discussion of the relationships between elements contains one misrepresentation. This response contains several long runs of language with an even tempo. Word and phrase stresses appropriate. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonant clusters does not affect understanding. Yes, there are a lot of incorrect pronunciation, but it doesn't hinder the understanding. The test taker demonstrates good control of standard English grammar with very few errors, and the vocabulary used is precise and appropriate for the context. This response lasts for 35 seconds. Even though this response is not as great as I want your response to be, but still you can see you can score C1. So don't worry too much and don't get too nervous about this part of the test, because it's quite challenging, but you can still do a great job if you follow the template and you follow the structure that I've presented to you today, and you have a clear understanding of what you want to say. Okay, you don't want to be repeating yourself. Say less, but say quality. That's what I want to say. All right. Please pause the video here again and do this exercise on your own. 25 seconds for planning and 40 seconds for your response. Once you come back, we are going to review B1, B2, B, and C1 responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to do this exercise on your own. Let's listen to B1 response straight away.
This is a graph about motor vehicle shift. In the motor vehicle shifts are relatively decreasing trend. In 1998, it's about more than 57 per more than 57, but in 2002, it's only half of that amount. In 2001, it's around 56, and in the other two.
Right. Okay. So obviously you must have looked at this graph, and the graph is about motor vehicle theft. It gives you years at the bottom. You've got 1998 and you've got 2002. You have high points and low points here. You can always talk about the high point and the low point. You've got people per 100,000. So this is very important. You can't say 56 people were impacted by the motor vehicle theft. You could say that 56 over 1,000, 100,000 people were impacted in 1996. Okay, so 56 people. But obviously the highest point is 1998, and the lowest point is 2002. You can say that, it started dropping in 1999 and 2000, but then it started increasing in 2001, and then it's dropped in 2002 again. Okay, so the pattern is not even. You can also come up with this conclusion in the end. But let's look at B2 response.
In 1998, there are about 57 people in 100,000 people lost their motor vehicles. In 1999, numbers declined by 5 people and kept the same in 2000. In 2001, number increased by 4. In 2002, there is only 51 people lost their motor vehicle in 100,000 people.
So that's a good response, but it starts speaking about response, it start speaking about the details. It doesn't really introduce the graph. It should talk about the topic first. It didn't discuss the topic. It doesn't say the the bar chart shows motor vehicle theft by people per 100,000, and it's been represented as by years. So these are some of the things you want to do. It kind of misses that, and that's why I think. But I really like the response. I feel it does deserve that B2 level at least, even without the topic being introduced.
Following graph shows us about the motor vehicle theft from 1998 to 2002. The highest number of motor vehicle thefts were recorded in 1998, and the lowest number were in 2002. 1999 and 2000, it was around 53.5 per 100, 3.5 thousand per 100,000. It increased again in 2001 and it has gone down considerably in 2002 actually.
Right. Okay. So it does talk about the patterns, what's happening, and then it drops down considerably. He used that adjective. So you want to use these adjective considerably. Adverb, not adjective. Adverb. You want to use these adverbs to be able to describe, what's happening considerably, significantly, usually, all of these things. You got to use them because you can see that he scored C1 for that. So some of the points that you can think of here are the graph shows the number of people, and always start with the graph shows. The graph shows if it's a graph, if the image shows, or the image illustrates all of these things. You want to start with the topic. That's number one thing that I will say. The graph shows the number of people who have had motor vehicles stolen within the period of 1998 to 2000. Car vehicle theft was highest in 1998. Yeah, it was highest. It was lowest in 2002. It was about the same in 1999 and 2000. B1, while the response describes some major aspects of graph, several key details are not included or misinterpreted. Several hesitations, repetitions, and false starts negatively affect fluency. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonants makes several words clear. There is limited control over simple grammatical structures. This response lasts for 39 seconds. B2, while the response includes a description of the graph, several key details are not included. The rate of speech is acceptable, but has an unnatural rhythm. Most words can be understood, but certain consonants are omitted. This might require listeners to adjust to the accent of the speaker. Language is weak, and grammar errors are present. This response lasts for 38 seconds. C1. Excuse me. The major aspects of graph and relationships between elements are accurately discussed. The response is spoken at an acceptable rate of speech, although several phrases are said very quickly. So you don't want to be speaking very quickly. You want to slow down and speak so that it's easier for you to make sense, as well as your recording to make sense as well. And it gives you time to think as well if you slow down. So you don't want to be speaking too fast. Use the same pattern that I'm using right now to speak slowly. Okay, this is how you want to record your response. Now, anyway, incorrect pronunciation of some consonant clusters does not affect understanding. This response demonstrates adequate control of standard English grammar. This response lasts for 35 seconds. Okay. So with 35 seconds, you can score C1. That's your evidence in terms of sweet spot timing. Let's look at, so pause the video here. Again, look at this graph and do it on your own, and we'll come back and do the drill. We will look at B1, B2, and C1 responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at the graph. So this graph is obviously the the topic sometimes is not at the top, so you have to look at the bottom sideways. You need to find the topic. So here the topic is rainfall, right? So this is talking about rainfall, and there are two lines on the graph. We've got average daily temperature, and you've got average daily temperature. You've got a brown, sort of brown and purple lines, and then if you look at on the left hand side, we've got temperature Celsius, and we've got rainfall. Now, in terms of rainfall, that blue bar is the rainfall, isn't it? That blue bars are rainfall, and it's been given to you in millimeters. You've got full 12 months period has been given to you: January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. When you have too much information, it's really complicated to look at everything and try to make sense of everything. These are relationships. So you try to simplify for yourself. You want to talk about rainfall, you can talk about rainfall in January, and you can talk about rainfall. I mean, the highest rainfall I can see in June, right? So I'm kind of ignoring the temperatures here at the moment, and I'm just going to talk about rainfall. Because if I try to do, very complicated relationship, I might just get into a situation where I can't really explain it anymore. So in 25 seconds, you have to get what you can get. And I'm going to really focus here on rainfall. The highest rainfall is between May to June. And the lowest amount of rainfall is observed in October to December period. Okay. And then average temperature, I don't really worry about that. So let's listen to B1 response.
The graph explains how that during June that the rainfall is higher than any other month in the year, and was and October, November, December is are the month where the rainfall is less. Yeah, it's less frequently.
All right, so I can see that you have, when there is a very complicated graph like this, what happened to her is that she was looking at a lot of information. A lot of information is presented to her, and she's trying to make sense of it. When you start recording, your making sense period is over. You can't be making sense of things. You should be already clear about what you want us to talk about, and you should just be focusing on speaking. If you're trying to analyze while you're speaking, you're going to lose marks. So don't do what she did. B2.
The graph shows that the rainfall during 1 year is widely distributed, and the most rainfall is in June and May and July. The average daily temperature and the average daily temperature mean does not have much difference during the year. So that means temperature of daily temperature doesn't change a lot.
Okay, so he tried to come up with the meaning, but it was very hard to kind of think about the meaning on the spot. But he did say that in the end, but that he had to think a lot about the meaning. So he would have done that in 25 seconds, but he was thinking while he was speaking. So this is a very dangerous tactic where you try to think and speak at the same time, and you may run into a position where you'll lose marks for fluency because you're pausing too long. Okay, you don't want to be pausing too long. All right, C1.
Fall, especially in the month of June, it seems to be grows faster and indicates the higher figures compared to the other months. And further, we can see that from the graph, it shows that on October, the temperature and even the rainfall indicates the lowest millimeters compared to the other months. We can see as well that in the month of January until December, it seems that the average daily temperature for the maximum and the minimum temperatures seems to be steady and not change drastically.
Not change drastically. She's using adverbs. She's using quite a lot of vocabulary and kind of presenting a lot of information as well, which is fine because she has the structure. She's thought about what are the points you want to talk about. So let's look at the main points to be included in the description. The graph shows the rainfall and average daily temperature from January to December. Most rain fell in June, the least rain fell in October and November. The average daily temperature was stable from January to December. That's okay. Like I said, I mean, I personally would not look at too many complicated things because making the relationship could be very, very hard. But if I'm going for it, I have to do it before I start speaking, not after I start speaking. Okay, so B1, two basic elements of graph are described, but the main idea is not discussed. While there are a few phrases spoken at a natural rate, fluency is negatively affected by multiple hesitations and long pauses. Incorrect pronunciation of consonants might require listeners to adjust to the accent of the speaker. There is limited control over simple grammatical and lexical structures. This response lasts for 31 seconds. B2, the major aspect of the graph are accurately described, although there is no discussion of the relationship between the elements. While some phrases are spoken at an acceptable rate, several hesitations make the response uneven. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonants and vowels does not affect understanding. The vocabulary is basic and word choice is limited to words that appear on the graph. This response demonstrates control over simple grammatical structures. This response lasts for 39 seconds. And in C1, the major aspect of the graph and several relationships between elements are accurately discussed. Response is spoken at an acceptable speed and in continuous phrases. Obviously, there are not so many hesitations and pauses. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonants, and we saw that, you know, on October instead of in October, we do have some grammatical errors there. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonants are also visible, and vowels does not affect understanding. Minor, it doesn't affect the understanding. That's the main thing. So you could score C1 even if you have a few little bit of pronunciation errors here and there. Minor grammatical errors do not lead to misunderstandings. Precise vocabulary and cohesive devices are used. He's using a lot of cohesive devices like we discussed in writing lesson, writing essay lesson, like adverbs, you know, joining the adverbs. And this response lasts for 36 seconds. All right, please pause the video here. Do this exercise on your own, 25 seconds to plan and 40 seconds to respond your response. And when you come back, we're going to review the responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at this item. This is our second last item. And you can see it doesn't tell you the title on the top. The title can be seen at the bottom. So you're going to have to read a little bit of description. The title has been presented to you in a little bit of description here. Arctic sea ice volume has decreased. It's actually a statement. Has decreased by 40% as compared with volumes 3 or 4 decades ago. Okay, so that's our topic. It's about Arctic sea ice volume, and it has decreased by 40% compared to the volume 3 or 4 decades ago. And then we look at, you know, on the y-axis we've got meters, and on the right hand side we've got ice, and we've got we've got two portions of this. So we've got thickness of ice for the period 1958 and from to 1976. That's the 3 decades ago, right? And the thickness of the ice for the period 1993 to 1997, this decade, the ice is the volume has gone down, has decreased by 40%. So 1.3 meter volume down by 40%. Okay, in this 25 seconds, that's what you can analyze. I don't think you can analyze any longer than that. You have to start speaking. Let's look at some responses.
Atlantic sea swarm helps decrease by 40% as compared with swarm 3 to 4 decades ago.
That is it. Okay, wow. I was expecting that because it's quite complicated. But she's reading out that sentence that has been presenting at the bottom. And I think that's fine to read it out, but you can paraphrase it, right? I mean, I understand that the graph, and you can say the graph, or the image is about Arctic sea ice volume, and it has decreased by 40% when we compare it to 3 or 4 decades ago. And we can, there is another option we can use is 1.3 meter volume down by 40%. Let's look at B2.
By 40% as compared with volumes 3 to 4 decades ago. In 1958 until 1976, thickness of ice for this period is great, but thickness of the ice for period 1993 till 1997 is 1.3 meter volume down by 40%.
Cool. All right. So yeah, it's quite complicated. So he's got a lot of information. He talked about, it's gone down by 40%. He talks about what was the thickness from 1958 to 1976, and then what is the thickness of 1993 to 1997. It's gone down by 1.3. I think it's good coverage of the points that we have here.
This graph shows the Arctic sea ice volume in comparison between the 1958 to 1976 period and the 1993 to the 1997 period of time. And it was shown from this graph that there is the decrease in the ice volume of the Arctic sea by 40%.
Right, good. So you can hear her emphasis, right? She's using a lot of stress, word stress, and she's talking about important details with the stress. So that's something that is added, and she gets a C1 score. So let's look at some of the points here first. And the main points to be included in the description is chart compares the thickness of Arctic sea ice between periods 1958 to 1976 and 1993 to 1997. The thickness of Arctic sea is decreased by 40% between the period of 1958 to 1976 and the period 1993 to 1997. The Arctic sea ice was 40% less in volume in 1990s than in the period of 1958 to 1976. In the period 1993 to 1997, Arctic ice has decreased by 40% compared to the period of 1958 to 1976. These are all paraphrasing, saying the same things, but you can paraphrase and say that thing. From 1976 to 1997, the volume of Arctic sea in the Arctic was down by 1.3 meters, or reduced by 1.3 meters. The volume of Arctic ice has declined significantly since the period 1958 to 19. You can also use significantly, like adverbs are very important. Declined significantly. Over 4 decades, the volume of Arctic sea ice decreased by 40%. So you can, over 4 decades, you can also paraphrase in that way. I mean, there's a lot of paraphrasing that you need to do. Repetition you can use as well, but it's a tough one. And that's why, you need to think about what you have to say before. You don't have much time to read. There's a lot of information. Focus on the main points and just say them by using paraphrasing. Okay, let's look at B1 response. The test taker reads one sentence from the image and does not describe. It even says that she's just literally reading that from one sentence from the image. Do not do that. I mean, paraphrase. If you have to read the sentence, you have nothing else to say, paraphrase at least. And does not describe any elements in the graph. Incorrect pronunciation of vowels and consonants make most phrases unclear. Stress placement is not standard on common words, and phrase stress is misplaced. Speech is slow and labored. This response lasts for 10 seconds only. B2, while the response describes several major aspects of the graph, the response is limited to words that appear in the graph. So it's not using any adverbs, right? So it's not using any cohesive devices, and that's what you want to use. Speech is staccato. Incorrect pronunciation of consonants and vowels might require listeners to adjust to the accent of the speaker. There are minor word and phrase stress errors. This response demonstrates moderate control of standard English grammar. This response lasts for 26 seconds. C1, while major aspects of the graph are accurately described, specific details are omitted. The response is spoken at a natural rate and in continuous phrases. Sentence level stress is not standard. It's not standard, but still she's using the stress, which is good. Pronunciation is standard. This response demonstrates good control of standard English grammar with few grammatical errors. This response lasts for 26 seconds. Not even 30 seconds, but it still scores C1. Because this, they know that this one is a hard one. So if you get a really, really hard, don't think that you're the only one who's going to score, who is going to have difficulty doing that. There will be other students that will have the same amount of difficulty, and you can still score C1 with that level of response, only 26 seconds, and you still get C1. Okay. Last one, I want you to pause 25 seconds for planning. Lots of information here as well. And you've got 40 seconds to record, listen to your response, and we're going to review B1, B2, and C1 responses when you come back. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at look at this chart and record your response. Now we're going to look at this response and review it and analyze it and understand, what are the things that we can look at. So obviously, look at the first heading. It does give you the topic. The topic here is benefit recipient by health area in Sydney, 2004. Percent of eligible population. So in brackets, it kind of says that technical term means that percentage of eligible population who receives a benefit from the health area in Sydney in 2004. You've got two areas here, Sydney, Southwest, and you've got Southeastern Sydney and Illawarra. Age pension. There are two types of benefits that people receive, age pension and you've got disability pension. Age pension is represented by a blue bar and disability pension is represented by a green bar. The biggest amount of pension that is received by people is age pension, and disability pension is the smallest pension that is received by people. You can come up with that opinion as well. On the left-hand side, you have eligible percentage of populations, right? So this is percentage 73.3% and 64.9%. You've got about 7% of people receive the disability pension in the Western areas, and about 73.3% receive the age pension, and in southern areas you've got about 64.9% people receive age pension, and about 6.2% receive the disability pension. Okay, so that's quite a lot to talk about here, and it's pretty straightforward as well. I don't think this should be a hard one. So let's see. B1 response.
In 6 steps, age pension is more than Sydney Southwest and lesser than Southeastern Sydney, and disability pension is lesser than Southeastern Sydney, and it's increased in Southwest Sydney.
Okay, that's a very short response. I think she didn't really say that. Maybe a 10-second response, I don't know, to a 15. We'll have a look. But it's quite a short response, and it didn't really make sense to me at first. Let's look at B2.
In this graph, we can see the population and contrast between age person and disability person in Sydney, and it's a comparing between Sydney Southwest and between Southeastern Sydney, Illawarra. The differences are Sydney Southwest have a 73.3 age person, beside this 7 point is disability persons.
Right. So I mean, the ideas are not fluent or not logical. I mean, they're not sequenced logically. and it's all over the place. Again, I felt that, you know, she's trying to analyze when she's speaking. So you don't want to be analyzing it when you're speaking. You have 25 seconds to analyze, and then you speak in your 40 seconds. Okay, but what she's doing is she's looking at other things that you can, and she's trying to speak, and that's the reason why she's so slow in speaking. But she still scores B2, right? Let's look at C1.
The percentage of people in Sydney Southwest that had benefit recipients of health area in Sydney were 73.3% and 7.0%, compared to the area in southeastern Sydney and Awama, where 64.9% got age pension and 6.2% got disability pension.
Right. Good pronunciation, very organized, talks about the Sydney Southwest area first, and then talks about the southeast eastern Sydney and Illawarra area, and talks about the age pension percentage as well as disability pension percentage as well. So I think it kind of covers everything as well in a logical way. Let's just talk about some of the things that you can look at. Main points to be included in the description. In 2004, approximately about 73% of the eligible population of Sydney Southwestern Sydney received an age pension, and while 7% received a disability pension, this compares with 64.9% and 6.2% respectively in eastern Sydney and Illawarra. B1, basic elements of graph are described, but the image is misinterpreted. While a few phrases are spoken at a natural rate, other phrases are irregular and staccato. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonants makes several words unclear. The response demonstrates limited control over standard English grammar. This response lasts for 13 seconds only. While the response, now in terms of B2, while the response includes a description of graph, key information is misinterpreted or omitted. Speech is slow and several hesitations make the response uneven. Incorrect pronunciation of several vowels and consonants make some words unclear. There's moderate control over simple grammatical and lexical structures. The response lasts for 38 seconds. In terms of C1, while the major aspects of the graph are accurately described, several key details are omitted, and there is no discussion of the relationship between the elements in the graph. Kind of differ on this opinion here. While the major aspects of the grammar accurately, several key details are omitted. Well, I mean, yeah, it doesn't talk about the ear, but I mean, it's still quite good for me. The initial phrases are spoken slowly, but there is no hesitation, repetition, or false start. Yeah, the start was a kind of a slow one, but he kept on, you know, the flow was good. Pronunciation is standard and stress is placed correctly on common words. This response demonstrates good control of English, standard English grammar, and the response lasts for 29 seconds. And let me talk to you and let's recap everything that we discussed. Describe image. It's a very challenging part of the test. A lot of people struggle with this, I know from experience. And few things that I talked about here is that you've got 25 seconds. You want to use them very wisely. You want to look at the first things to look at in any image is what is the topic, and that's how you will introduce. You will say this graph or this image shows or illustrates. I've given you few adverbs to look at to introduce your graph. Then you talk about the key elements. You look at the key high and low points, and you look at those things that if you can explain them, that's great. If you look at any trend, look at the trends as well. Use present simple in most cases if you're not comparing anything in the past. And you want to come up with a conclusion. If you don't have enough things to say, you can always think about an implication that you think that you can include. And while you're coming close to your 30 second, I mean, we've got 40 seconds, while you're progressing towards 30 seconds, you can start concluding your essay, and 30 to 35 seconds is where we said it's a sweet spot where you want to end your describe image. you want to press next and you want to move on. You don't want to pause in the end for that 5-second period. Once you finish at 35 seconds or 30 seconds, whatever it is, you press next, move on to the next image, and get ready straight away. Look into that image for 25 seconds, analyze the image. And while you're speaking in your 40 seconds, do not try to overthink. Do not try to analyze at the same time while you're speaking, because then you're going to pause, and your pauses are going to be recorded, and you're going to lose marks for your oral fluency, okay? In terms of pronunciation, we talked about the word stress, and if you want more detail on that, you can go to my read aloud and repeat sentence lecture, and you can learn more skills there. But here we reviewed word stress, sentence stress, pronunciation, intonation, and just focus on your pronunciation. If you think that some of the words that you're not unfamiliar with, or you think that your pronunciation is not correct, go on Google, write that word, how to pronounce, and learn the pronunciation, learn the syllable stress, okay? And repeat 10 to 20 times to train your tongue and your mouth to produce that sound, and you will be good for the test. I would advise very highly that you do at least 50 describe images before you go into the real test, because you need practice. Your mind need practice. This is not an easy task. A lot of analysts in the world look at graphs and they can't make sense of it. It's not an easy thing. It's a very technical part of your test, and I want you to do a lot of practice before you go in the actual, because by the time you've done 50, I would even argue 100, but okay, if you want to do at least 50, do 50 properly in time conditions. And if you've done 50 describe images, your mind is prepared to tackle the ones that are going to be in your test, okay? So I wish you all the best, and this lecture concludes here. I'll see you in your next lesson. Take care, bye.